Welcome everybody to another in this series of the hard facts about soft skills. When I came up with the idea, and again, for those of you who don't know, I'm a soft skills and communication skills specialist, and I help people polish their professional presence. When I'm working with my clients, both American-born and foreign-born, because I help people with their foreign accents as well, and their public speaking skills, there are other colleagues I call upon to help with some of the areas I'm working on, because communication is a critical part of soft skills. When I came up with this series, and I wanted to do this for the Hunt Valley Business Forum, first person who came to mind when it comes to soft skills was Carol, because of etiquette. A lot of us don't know the proper etiquette, or we think we know the proper etiquette, and so I know we can always learn something from it. So I talked to Carol about it. We spoke in the beginning, and she said, great, this would be something wonderful to talk about and be interviewed about. And so here we are today. So what I'd like to do is start with Carol and just get some idea, or let Carol tell all of you her background, because I know Carol started in the business world. And I'd like to know where you started, Carol, and where you are, how you got here today.
Okay, great question. I've been doing this business for about 20 years now. I actually came out of the corporate world though, and I worked for one company, which I tell all the college students that I work with that probably is not going to happen to them, since statistics show that they will have 12 to 15 different jobs in their career. So I was with one company. For those of you that have been around for a while, it started out as First National Bank. So tells you how far back I go. And I was with them through a couple of different iterations. I had really 3 different jobs within that one company. I ran a training program for a lot of years. It was a commercial relationship manager training program, and it was an 18-month-long training program. Not too many companies do that anymore, where you're paying employees for 18 months worth of training and they're not being productive money-wise. I moved into sales from there, and then from there I moved into human resources. But I always tell everybody, the one thing that I continued to do throughout that job was I interviewed people, and I have done hundreds and hundreds of interviews. And over the course of that time, I really started to figure out what it was that made one person stand out above somebody else, or why in the training program there was one person, even if they weren't the strongest technically, why was it that person who really stood out? Because they had to interview for their job at the end of that training program. It was not a given that they were going to be placed within the company. And so I decided these were really the skills that I thought made the true difference. That, you could have the person who was the straight A student, top in their class, highest class rank, whatever, and they couldn't get a job. My business partner was a college professor, and we had found the exact same thing. She was finding that her best and brightest students weren't getting jobs. So we were actually introduced by a mutual friend and started the company. Started out teaching children, and then the business piece grew from that. We work a lot with at-risk youth down in Baltimore City. My business partners developed a program for the blind, so she travels all over the country teaching social skills to primarily younger teens, college students, that sort of thing, who are newly blind or becoming blind. So we've gone in all sorts of directions we never thought that we would go in, but I really do think that it is the skill that makes the difference. We like to say to people, it's the great equalizer. It doesn't matter what you have or what you didn't have, that if you have good manners, if you know how to handle yourself, no matter what the situation is, you will always have the opportunity for success.
And you're talking about the soft skills, which are so important, where so many people have the job interviews, and we've talked about this in previous sessions. So many people think, I need the hard skills,
Yes.
I need all the technical skills, and then they show up for that interview,
Right.
and they just don't have either the proper etiquette or any of the other soft skills that we've talked about
Exactly.
in the past. So I think, I certainly we all try to instill this if we have children, just remember to send the thank you note. We'll talk
Yes.
about some of those
Yes.
things. And some people think, well, that's passe, you don't have to do it, but it does make an
It makes
impression.
a difference.
One of the things I asked you about the other day is we're often going to networking events and seeing many people, and we want to introduce somebody to somebody else. And I know way back when there was a way that you're supposed to do it. I don't know that people do it now. But what are some of the rules of etiquette when you're introducing people to each other?
Well, I say the most important thing is that you do the introduction. There is nothing worse than being at an event where you're standing with people that you don't know. If somebody doesn't introduce you, then go ahead and introduce yourself. But if you're in a situation where, for example, you are introducing a new client or a prospect to your manager, your boss, president of the company, whoever it might be, you need to follow the rules. And the rules are that you're always going to say the name of the more important person first. So you are always introducing the less important person to the more important person. So technically, the wording would go, Ms. More Important Person, I would like to introduce to you Ms. Less Important Person. Ms. Less Important Person, I would like to introduce you to Ms. More Important Person. Again, the most important thing is to do the introduction, but when you're in a situation where it's going to make a difference, then you always want to be showing extra respect to the person who is more important. So if you were introducing, a little quiz here, if you're introducing your the prospect or new client to your manager, president of the company, who would be the more important person? Client. Because without the client, there's no need for the manager. So it's not black and white. You have to kind of think about it each time. If you were in a situation where you had people who were very high ranking, politics, whatever, then it would be really clear. But when you're in networking type situations, oftentimes it's not as clear. As I said, the most important thing is do the introduction. But think about it ahead of time if you're going into a situation where you know you're going to be doing a lot of those introductions and have some very important people there.
And I guess if it's a social situation, even maybe the elder person is the more respected, supposedly, and the more important person.
So there are a few things that haven't changed, and that is that women still are accorded a little bit of extra respect in certain circumstances. So in social situations, it is age, indeed, and gender that will win out when you're deciding who is the more important person.
I've been here. What if you forget the name of the person?
Yes.
Has that happened to anybody here?
Yes, I was going to say anybody who doesn't admit to that happening to them is not telling the truth. So, first of all, a true show of hands. Has that happened to anybody here? Oh, yeah. Okay. Does that make you feel better? Okay, when you're in that situation, it's so embarrassing. I mean, you can forget your spouse's name, your significant other's name. I mean, it'll be on the tip of your tongue. So, number one, I think using humor is a great way to get through this. And like, I'm having a senior moment. I'm so sorry. I know your name as well as my own. The other thing you do is you'll say, if you're the person you're introducing them to, you say, have you met my boss or my husband or whomever it might be? You give that person's name, keeping your fingers crossed that they're going to say, oh, hi, I don't think we have met. My name is. But again, it happens to all of us. As long as it is not the 20th time that you have forgotten that person's name, nobody should be insulted, right? So none of us get offended if somebody forgets our name.
And sometimes there's that code with couples especially. Like I know with my husband, he'd say, if I'm not introducing you right away, introduce yourself. Because clearly you can't think of that name, and it's an embarrassing moment. So sometimes even with friends, if somebody comes up and they're not introducing, just jump right in and say, hi, I'm Linda Wilner. And it just makes it easier.
And I was going to say the other thing is that's why name tags are a wonderful thing to have. So make sure that you are writing it in big letters, clearly so everybody can read it. And I see there are a few people that know this, but name tags go on the right. Any idea why?
Yeah, you shake hands.
Exactly. It's the line of sight, so it helps you not be so obvious because it's sort of you're shaking hands, it's up and then to the face. If it's over here, it's up, over, and then to the face.
And hopefully not down here where when you go to conferences, that's where you're wearing them.
Yes,
Does that make sense?
No, not whatsoever. But name tags, my husband hates to wear name tags, and I keep saying it's not for you, it's for the other people. So name tags are a wonderful thing. So anytime you have the opportunity to put on a name tag, absolutely do. You'll save your peers there a lot of embarrassment when they can't remember your name.
Carol, I think of another strategy that I try to use as often as I can, that when I see somebody, I remind them of my name, because we're all forgetting names. And it's like, of course I know your name, well, but maybe they didn't. And so just to take that awkward moment away and just say, it's great to see you again, I'm Linda Wilner, I met you, whatever it might be, bless you.
I've noticed when I've forgotten people's names that people seem to pick up on that.
Yeah.
And like I'll be talking and say, oh, this person does this, and then all of a sudden they'll jump ahead and say who they are. So my point in that is be aware that somebody might have forgotten your name and that's why they're not introducing you.
Yes.
So
Yes.
feel free to jump ahead of that person and say the one that wants to introduce you, the embarrassment of saying
Yeah.
name after you've forgotten your name.
Yeah, because we've all been, every hand went up. We've all been in the position. So whatever you can do to make it a less uncomfortable situation or a more comfortable situation for somebody, introduce yourself, do something, leave a break there so that they will jump in and do it. But it's a kindness to the other person.
And I'd like to think etiquette and protocol is not to make you feel worse. It's to make you feel better,
Right.
or make things go smoother.
Well, I always say my favorite definition of good manners is if you always put the needs of the other person in front of your own, you will always have good manners. And it's, the same thing when you are thinking about how to make the other person feel comfortable. It's introducing yourself. It's making sure that, they don't have to be in that embarrassing moment of admitting that they've forgotten your name.
Since we're talking about networking and meeting people, why don't we talk a little bit about and I know we've talked about this at other seminars that we've done here, handshakes.
Yes.
What can you say? Have handshakes changed at all over the years?
So there are a couple of things. So let me ask you this. Do we judge people by their handshake? What do you think?
Yes.
Yeah. You get one of those weak, limp, fishy handshakes. The immediate assumption is the person's got no self-confidence. I'm not sure if I want to interact with this person. So handshakes are really important. The one piece that really has changed has to do with women. Anybody know the history of the handshake? You know where it comes from? History? It goes back to a time when men carried weapons, dangerous times, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. Your right hand was always your weapon hand, even if you were left-handed, because when you had people lined up, all the shields had to be lined up. So the shield was always in your left hand, the sword or the knife, whatever, was always in your right hand. So when you would meet somebody, the way that you would show that you wanted to be a friend and not an enemy was you extended your right hand. The shaking actually comes from making sure there was nothing tucked up the sleeve. So men were shaking hands because they were the ones carrying weapons. Women didn't traditionally carry weapons. So it took a long time for it to become a social greeting, and then women started to be part of that. And some of you that are as old as I am may remember that a man didn't assume that a woman wanted to shake hands. You always waited for the woman to put her hand out first. Well, that goes back to a time when women might have been wearing gloves. It wasn't necessarily, it was simply social. It was nothing more. Well, as women moved into and up in the corporate world, it became equally as important, if not more important, for women to shake hands too. Number one, a man does not need to wait for a woman to put her hand out first. And number two, we all need to stand when we shake hands. You'll see oftentimes much older, particularly women, who won't stand when they shake hands. But there is nothing more awkward, I think, than shaking hands where one person is standing, the other person is seated. So you need to be at the same level as everybody. So just as we show respect, when we are bride coming down the aisle, judge walking in the room, we stand up. Same thing for handshaking. So it needs to be firm, and it needs to be firm whether you are shaking hands with a woman or a man. There is no reason to shake a woman's hand any less firmly than you shake another man's hand. It's not about a contest of strength. It's not, I can bring tears to your eyes, I can crush your knuckles, I can show you how powerful I am. It is that a weak, limp handshake is not being respectful, not showing confidence. So it needs to be firm. You'll back off if you're shaking hands with a much older person, but other than that, it needs to be firm.
So what do you do when you get the bone crusher? Literally, they are shaking your hand so hard. It's like, what
End
are
it
you
as
doing?
quickly as you can. The thing you don't want to say is, ow. And I have a very firm handshake, and I have to think about it. My mother was living in a retirement community nearby, and I'd have to literally think in my head, okay, softer handshake, softer handshake, softer handshake, because I shake hands so much that, it's just natural for me to come in with a strong handshake. But not everybody knows that.
Well, I've actually not, shook his hand initially, and then at the end of the meeting, I was like, nice to see you. And then I did not shake it again, didn't want anything to do with his handshake, because it hurt.
Yes. Yeah, it's hard, and you hope that person, hopefully somebody that knows the person will say something, but if it's somebody you're just meeting, you're not going to want to point it out. Generally, I think you're not going to find, you'll be more likely to have somebody on the other end where it's soft, and there's nothing worse. You know, when you shake hands, the web of your hand needs to connect with the web of the other person's hand. There is nothing worse than that fingertip handshake. And I'll even say, can we have a redo on that? Because I don't want anybody to think that I think the fingertip is okay.
That's a great point, because sometimes you've been in an awkward situation and you just gave a horrible handshake.
Mm-hmm.
But if you acknowledge it with humor, then at least you're sending that signal like, I
Yes.
know that wasn't good.
Yes.
And we can't forget about the different cultures, though, because, and I know I've talked about this before, other cultures assume they should shake hands differently with a female. And when I do workshops, I often shake hands with everybody before we start. It gives me a cue on who in that room doesn't have that handshake. And I did that at a workshop, and then at the end of the workshop, the person said to me, do you mean to tell me I should shake hands the same way with a female as a male? He said, that's my biggest takeaway. And I knew when he shook my hand when the workshop started, he took my fingertips. So understand that sometimes don't judge somebody if they are from a different culture. Ideally, if they're in our culture, they would learn what's appropriate. But we
Well,
have to be careful about judging.
And I was going to say, there are two cultural specifics where handshakes between men and women are not appropriate. So in the Orthodox Jewish community, men and women who are not related or married cannot shake hands. And in the more Orthodox Muslim community, sometimes the Hindu as well, men and women who are not related or married cannot touch, cannot shake hands. So if you're interacting with somebody that you think might be from one of those cultures, you can generally tell by dress, right? Let the other person initiate the handshake before you do it. But other than that, a handshake's always appropriate.
What about asking? Do you shake hands?
Social situations too.
Um,
Right.
Yeah, I have, if we have somebody in one of the groups, and I've had a couple situations where I've had either a Muslim woman, Orthodox Jewish woman who said, what do I do? And I will usually suggest that they come up with some sort of a body language greeting so that it is evident to the person that they are giving a greeting, but that they're not extending their hand. Now, if there comes a situation where somebody puts their hands out and sort of holds it, because, you know, all of us in business, I mean, it's what we do, it's how we greet people, that at that point, that person should explain that, I'm sorry, in my culture, we can't touch. But that hopefully, just by doing a head bow, I love, you know, the Indian, it's greeting is always this, and so just developing another greeting. So watch for the body language. I mean, body language is speaks louder than the words do. So that's also a way that you can tell if the other person, for whatever reason, is not able to shake. And if you see somebody come up and put their left hand out, put your left hand out. There's the left to right hand handshake is really awkward. So the only time you put the left hand out is if there's a reason you cannot use your right hand, and that can't be your hands are full. It's got to be the hand is hurt or there's some reason it doesn't work.
When you go to networking events, you're often holding a drink, holding food, and your drink is cold, possibly, your hands are wet. What are some thoughts about how you should handle it? I mean, you should have that right hand available in
Yes.
some way. What are your thoughts
So
about that?
I don't know if we talked about this in the networking group, but I always suggest, we do a lot of networking programs. Matter of fact, our mingling program is the most popular adult program we do, which tells me that the statistics about 90% of people not liking to mingle are true. I always say, if you are hungry when you get there, go eat before you mingle. There is nothing worse than eating, drinking, shaking hands, and carrying on a conversation at the same time. There are very few people that can master that. It's sort of a recipe for disaster. So go immediately to the food station, have your food, and then the drink stays in the left hand the whole time. You always want that right hand available for a handshake.
And to hopefully reach someplace for your business cards.
Yes, yep,
So
absolutely.
there's a lot to
Pinky under
manage.
the glass, so you don't drop it.
What's that?
The pinky goes under the glass so you don't drop it.
No, I hadn't heard that one before.
No, really,
The pinky under the
you
glass.
put it, you know, in a big bottle or a glass.
Oh, well, you're talking, because I guess I usually have a
hold it.
wine glass. I'm thinking,
Well,
well,
no, it could be any kind of glass. You can put the pinky goes under the,
okay,
in case it slips and you drop it on somebody's foot.
all right.
And then there was the invention. I know somebody who came up with this idea, and I've seen some things like it, where it's a little plate with a place to put your drink, so at least you hold that in one hand. But you're right about the eating. I find it, I don't eat when I even speak at an event, and they say, well, you can have breakfast. Well, I can't eat and present.
Right.
I don't want to eat really before I present,
Right.
so I'll do it afterwards. But when you go to these networking events, I find it very hard to meet people if I'm eating a chicken wing. Or you're worrying if there's food in your teeth. I mean, so talk
Exactly.
about etiquette, you start to worry about
Yes.
those things, and then you're not focusing on meeting people. if that
Absolutely.
happens. Back to the handshake for a moment. What do you think about, I know ideally it's thumbs up,
Mhm.
but what do you think, and I've had experiences with this, with a hand over, a hand under, what do you think about, or what impression is that making on people?
My impression if somebody does it, it's often somebody in the military, I find, who will do that. It becomes more of a power thing. I feel like it's sort of a flip, I'm, again, more powerful than you are.
mhm.
So there's not, as you talked about, what happens if somebody gives you one of those really powerful handshakes. There's nothing you can do if somebody does it, but I immediately read into the body language, and it's generally negative if somebody
Mhm.
does that.
And on the other hand, I've mentioned this before, if I met a doctor who shook my hand and did this, and she put my hand on top, and I don't even know if it was intentional, but she gave me control. And so I had very positive feelings because it was subtle, but she let me be the one in charge. And I don't know if that was planned.
Yeah, but isn't it
certainly you
amazing?
perceive
Yeah.
that. It becomes part of how you feel about that person by how they shake their hand.
I was
shake
just gonna
their
say,
hand.
body language is just so amazing. I mean, there was a man named Albert Moravian who did a lot of work at UCLA, and what he found that the initial communication when you're meeting somebody, 55% of that communication comes from what you see, your body language, your dress. 38% comes from the tone of your voice. So if the person's shouting, it's really hard to hear them, it's very nasally, whatever. 7% comes from the words. So I always tell everybody when you're doing an interview, if the 93% is negative, I don't care how good the 7% is.
And-
You've got to.
And the hard thing about that study, because everybody does quote that, but it was really judged on saying one word, like yes, no, maybe, with a different facial expression. So it's not the whole image, but yet when we talk to people, we know that the visual is so important. And even a more recent study done at Princeton said that you're being judged in 1/10 of a second of somebody looking at your face. And it's unfortunate, but that's what happens. In that 1/10 of a second, they decide how attractive you are. Well, that's a no-brainer. How competent you are. If you're a dominant person, if you're extroverted, and if you're trustworthy. And when they test it an hour later, they had the same impressions. So that momentary connection with somebody is critical.
It's all the
It's
difference.
frightening. It's frightening because it doesn't seem fair,
Right,
but it's what happens.
right.
So there's so much etiquette when we're at an event and we're meeting people. What about what we wear? Now we have the casual Fridays. Did you have a question?
Well, we talked about the handshake,
Mhm.
what about the Joe Biden hug and all that?
Okay.
Good
Yeah,
question.
because, I've always been, I'll shake your hand with them. But then sometimes
And
they
you're right.
come over to,
Yes. I'm not sure why we sort of developed that habit. I mean, it's very European. You look at the Mediterranean culture, South American culture, Central American culture. It's very much about touch. If you meet somebody from one of those cultures, they want to touch you. Even in the Middle Eastern, for men, there's going to be more touch than just the handshake. It's not something we've traditionally done in this country, but you absolutely are seeing it. What I suggest to people is, number one, you should never assume that somebody wants to be hugged. When you look at space, again, this was a big study that was done, but anything closer than 18 inches, you have invaded that person's personal space. That space is reserved for family members, for people we're very close to, and once you invade that, it's like you may have somebody who immediately backs off and is immediately turned off. So I say if you are not comfortable with hugging, what you do is when you do the handshake, just lock that arm. The two hands creates about a 2.5 to 3 foot space, and that's where most of us are comfortable if you're having a conversation with somebody. So you just lock it in. You should never assume that somebody wants to be hugged. And so, again, it is absolutely something that we see now. I don't think that somebody like Joe Biden ever meant harm, but what he didn't do a good job of doing was reading body language and seeing that, if somebody stiffens, if you see somebody's facial expression change when you do that, immediately okay, I need to back off.
Or if you're moving closer and they're moving back, don't keep moving closer. Observe that.
Yes.
I'm glad you brought that question up about the handshake. What about the handshake like this, that two-handed?
Yes. or like this is, we call
Yes.
this the glove handshake. If you are expressing emotion, I'm so sorry for your loss, congratulations, something along those lines, the two-handed handshake is fine. Other than that, it is always a single-handed handshake. So in the business world, it is a single-handed handshake. There's no need to have that.
On flu season, it's all right to just do this.
Uh,
I've noticed that.
That's an
Well,
interesting question to talk about.
Yes, I remember the time, I think it was the swine flu was going around, where even in churches, you weren't shaking hands. I hate to tell you, you touch the door handle, you touch the back of your chair, I pick up glasses, whatever that somebody else has touched, you're getting the exact same germs. There was a study that was done, guy was handing out diplomas, 5,000 people, and they tested the germs on his hands before the 5,000 were handed out, and after, same number of germs. So the handshake doesn't do a whole lot. We all need to be conscious of the fact that every time we touch something that we're getting exposed to germs. So I generally say no. I know in the hospitals it's sort of the elbow bump, and that's probably a little bit different situation because they're interacting with people who are already compromised. But for the business world, no.
Could you say, I'm sorry, I have a cold or?
Absolutely,
not
that's the
feeling
kind,
well?
I don't, yes, I don't want to pass it on. But again, unless it is serious, we all need to be conscious of the fact that we're coughing into our left hand, we're using tissue with our left hand so that, we're not in a situation, because it's a little bit uncomfortable. If you think about it, you walk into a business situation, we're so used to shaking hands. And I appreciate if somebody says, I'm sick, I don't want to give it to you, but at the same time, I'm breathing the same air you are, I'm touching the same things you're
What are you
touching.
doing in the office?
Right, yeah, exactly.
Right.
So just carry the antiseptic wipes with you.
So, I interact with a lot of people and I shake a lot of hands. Sometimes palms are very sweaty. Sometimes people are touching their face and I'm very conscious of germs. So I do shake the hand and afterwards I go to the bathroom and wash my hands or put some hand sanitizer on them. But if you see somebody putting their hands all over their face, it's just very uncomfortable. So I'm with you. I'm like, is that not appropriate?
No.
Or?
It's not. And I go back to a situation where we were at a formal dinner and there was a man there who was a germophobic, and my husband puts his hand out and the guy does this, and it was like, huh? It's not. I work with a lot of kids, and you can imagine where I see those hands go.
Yeah.
So I understand exactly what you're saying, but it's just a matter of always having hand sanitizer, hand wipes, making sure that you can go to the restroom and wash your hands.
But if
as
someone
opposed
is
to-
a germaphobic, should they say that to you,
No.
or you should just shake hands?
Just shake hands.
And
Sorry.
Think about these networking events we go to where we're shaking hands, spending half hour doing that, and then we sit down at the table and we eat.
Yeah. Always good.
I often have sanitizer in my purse because I know
Yes.
maybe there are 20 or 30 people's hands that I shook, and now I'm going to eat, but I'm not going to run out and wash my hands.
Yes.
So think about that too, and try not to make it so obvious that
Right.
I have the cooties, I've
Yes,
been touching all these
exactly.
hands, but just I might take it out of my purse and just clean my hands before I eat.
And I appreciate people doing it. The worst is when you go to those restaurants where they cut through the bread like 3/4 of the way. So then everybody that needs a piece of bread has got hands all over it. So, yes, I hear you.
Thank you.
A lot of
Yeah,
things
you
to
can
think about.
sanitize your hands, but how do you sanitize the bread?
Exactly.
It's great.
Exactly. Just don't get that one.
Yeah.
As I started talking about before, what about the clothing and
Yes.
the dress and the casual, because I've shown up or I've worked in some places where it's casual Friday or you pay $1 and you could wear jeans that day and people are wearing shredded jeans and they're professionals. You still see clients, or you're still working with patients or whatever it might be. What are your thoughts about that, Carol?
So I think the reality is we judge people by appearance. We judge people by how they dress. The other reality is that we all work for companies that have a right to decide what the image is they would like to have. And particularly when I'm working with college students, I say, well, if you are insistent on being very casual, then you need to find a company for whom that is an appropriate way to dress. And I find one of the issues with companies is that once they make it a slippery slope, people tend to go downhill very fast, so that people will look to what other people are wearing and decide that that's appropriate. When I teach dress to a group, I usually say, tell me what the impression is you want other people to have of you. So what would be some words that would pop to mind? When somebody sees you, what do you want? What words do you want to come to their mind?
Polished.
Polished,
Neat.
neat,
Capable.
capable,
Professional.
professional. For some of the younger people I work with, it might be mature, so you don't want to look like the youngest person at the company. So I can't tell somebody how to dress. There's no book that says, here's how you dress for this situation. You have to decide how for you will manifest those qualities. You always want to dress more conservatively. For those of you that are meeting with clients regularly, I always say that you want to be dressed one step above your client. So if your client is a shredded jeans type of company, you're not going to show up in shredded jeans, but you're not going to show up in a three-piece suit. So you have to decide on a day-to-day basis. So you need to, I always say, look to the person who is in the position you would like to have. So that might not be the person for whom you work. Look to somebody that's been at the company for a while, somebody that has had success within that company, and watch how they dress and see what they do. But again, we have to keep in mind that the reality is that we will be judged by how we dress, and that it is not an easy decision to make. I've worked with one company that actually put together a manual with pictures on what they sort of expected from people. I've got another book that talks about the levels of casual dress. I mean, there are 5 different in this book, 5 different levels of casual dress. A lot of people will think the men's pretty easy. I mean, the only professional dress for a man is a matching suit and pants and shirt and tie. That's it. For women, the most professional dress is a skirted suit, pantsuit, or business dress with a jacket. That's it for professional dress. Everything below that becomes casual dress, all different levels. And so again, every company gets to decide. Hose for women is a big issue. You know, it used to be when I started out, you absolutely wore hose. I have one woman, friend who works at Hopkins in their legal division. They are required to wear hose to work and can get sent home if they don't as an attorney. Most companies don't require it anymore, but nevertheless, when you're going into a very formal situation, it's still something you need to think about whether or not it would be appropriate for that situation.
And there could be a casual Friday and then a client shows up.
Yes. Same thing with your workspace. I mean, I've had companies where they will walk me through their kind of back office and saying, you know, we do have clients come in here, so you may think, okay, I'm not meeting any clients today, therefore I can be sloppy. Well, you never know. And, you know, I've been in this situation, I'm sure you all have, where you think you've got no client meetings on your calendar and you get a call and you end up having to go out and you are dressed more casually. Guys have it pretty easy. You can put a blazer on the back of your door, put that on, and you're good to go. For the women, it's not quite so easy, which is why for women, you almost always have to be prepared for the unexpected when you're in the business world.
And speaking about women, I was speaking to a group last week of women who work in their workplace is primarily men, and they want to be taken seriously. What about how a woman should dress? Because I saw some inconsistencies, and that wasn't the topic for the day, so it wasn't my place to say it. But the way this woman was dressed, and she was concerned about being taken seriously, because she was the only woman in the room, I don't think she was dressed conservatively enough. But that wasn't part of the discussion, it was my observation. Let's talk about that a little bit,
With
about
no
how
names.
women should be dressing.
I always say for women, you want to be noticed for what you have going on from here up. From here down, you want to look like you belong. So you don't want to dress in a way that it calls attention to what you have going on from here down. And so for every woman, you know, that's going to be different. I say no provocative clothing. You know, there's no place in the workplace for cleavage. I still remember going back probably 20 years the day the one administrative assistant wore a see-through lace blouse stretch, and everybody in my office was right across from where her desk was. Everybody in the office walked by the end of the day, and it just becomes distracting. So again, looking to make sure that you are noticed from what you have going on here up is important.
And that goes along with headshots and your LinkedIn photos, because when I left the meeting and I looked at her on LinkedIn, it was consistent with what I saw, that it didn't look professional. It looked more of what she might have on Match.com.
Yes.
And then I'm exaggerating, but you want to be taken seriously. So it may have its place in one setting, but when you're trying to be on equal
Yes.
footing with men in a professional way,
Yes.
It
It's
seems like
very
you're shooting
hard.
yourself in the foot by doing that.
Did were any of you at the program that we did at PSA where we had? And I'm drawing a total blank the person's name, so it's a good thing she's not here. Who did the headshots? We did a whole
I was at
piece
that.
on headshots and image and that sort of stuff. Anybody? It was great. But we talked about how important. I mean, we hadn't even touched on that. But think about it. In this day and age, before somebody meets you, they're going to look at your LinkedIn profile. So there are no pictures that you have, no selfies that you have taken. I mean, invest the money, make sure, or have somebody who's a good photographer take a picture, make sure that it is the image so that when they meet you, you have, there's a phrase that's good, I'm drawing a blank as to what it is, but basically you want that image to be what they expect when they meet you in person.
So I work in the construction industry and I work with a bunch of men. So my background is working for IBM. I'm more conservative. So it was a challenge for me to dress down, learn to dress down. Like today, I'm dressed down. But most of this is really dressed up for them. So when I come into work, yesterday I had to go do mock interviews. So I'm dressed up with my dress and my heels and my, pearls and my pearl earring. So it's like that brings attention as opposed to,
Yes.
it's like trying to balance it out. That's one of the things that's been a little bit challenging
Yes.
for me, because when I do one-on-one with clients that are in the construction field, and even when I do trainings with them, I always put on my pearls, my,
Yes.
and dress, but it just seems to just be a challenge, just balancing it out, because it was just so strange coming into an environment where every day, if you wanted to, you could wear jeans.
Yes, exactly. Didn't matter how sloppy. But I would venture
Maybe
again,
the cause.
sloppier. Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
The sloppier the better, probably. I was going to say, I would venture a guess that they look up to you. So
Yes.
that-
Everybody calls me Miss.
right,
you know,
exactly.
but even though I am old,
Yeah.
so they always call me Miss.
Older.
Yeah,
Older.
older.
Yeah.
Older, so they do, some of the ladies are disrespected, but if they're using profanity, they see me, oh, excuse me.
Yes.
Those are the things which I like it like that.
Yes.
But, I still want to feel like I'm being a part.
But you've created that role for yourself in a very good way if
Yeah.
they're not speaking in a way that would be offensive to you.
Absolutely.
You
'Cause
set
I
the
train them.
stage
Yeah, I
train
with
them.
your dress and
Yes.
probably how you carry yourself. That's the soft skills we're
Yes.
talking about that
Yeah.
are so important.
How about tattoos?
It's interesting. The last statistic I saw was something like 46% of the population between the ages of 25 and 45 or something has a tattoo. It still is not totally accepted in the business world. There are some companies that will not allow it. And I always counsel, because I work with a lot of students, I always counsel them that, number one, don't get the tattoo, because what you think looks good now, probably 20 years down the road won't be looking so good. But the other thing is, if you have to get one, put it in a place where it's easily hidden, because if a company, as long as it is applied across the board, a company can have a rule, any rule they want about appearance for working there. And there's a makeup that is made called Dermablend, which is made to hide tattoos. Again, it's company to company. Same thing with like ear piercings for men. Anytime you're going in for an interview, you want to be the most conservative you can be. So for men, no earrings, very little jewelry other than a watch, and no tattoos. And once you get in there, if you notice that there are other people at the level that you aspire to reach that have those things, then it's probably okay. But again, as you were saying, there's no reason you can't be sort of a step above. You don't necessarily have to come down to that level. So you have to decide what you want to do. And I think that by having a visible tattoo or a lot of piercings, that you're limiting yourself as to what opportunities you will have going forward, because people will judge you. Less so now than before, but you never know who you're going to interview with or the age of the person for whom you're going to work. And if it's somebody that's my age, who grew up in a time where only unsavory people had tattoos, there's still maybe a little bit of that there, so you just don't know. So again, I think it sort of limits your opportunities.
And then you decide the workplace culture that accepts that. You go into certain places, for example, Trader Joe's. You're going to see nose piercings, everything,
Right.
because they've accepted it in that culture. they may not accept somebody unfriendly, because they have their standards, right? Everybody there is extremely friendly and helpful. So every workplace may have a different culture, and then maybe you find your niche, I can work there, but it's
Right.
really going to limit me from getting this other
Right.
job.
Yep, exactly.
So clothing is
Yes,
important.
Becky?
Any suggestions for the working mom? So in my case, I'm going here, I'm going to the office, I'm going to go pick up my 5-year-old, I'm going to go to piano lessons, band practice. I won't hit the house till dinner, but I can't be wearing a suit when my 5-year-old is climbing all over me sweaty. It'll get wrecked and I'll be forever stuck. And so I find myself constantly treading the line between how to look professional enough in clothes that can go with me all day.
And that's why business casual is such a wonderful thing, isn't it? Because, again, when I started back in the professional world, it was those days when IBM, as you remember, where, the men wore dark suits and white shirts and ties, and the ladies wore a dark suit and white shirts and the little tie, little bow in the neck. You remember those days? So it's changed a lot. So I think layering is one thing that's really good. If you can do like a jacket, you have a shirt and you can put a jacket on it so it sort of hides in case there was, greasy fingers or whatever that came out from nowhere. But it is really difficult to balance out. I also think that for shoes, there are absolutely acceptable to wear flats in the workplace. Not ballet flats, I would say. It needs to be a shoe with some structure to it. So there's no need to wear, the 4-inch heels and stuff when you're out there. Yeah. So no, I think you're fine, and I've worked with Becky before, and you always look great. So.
And to maybe have a closet in your car. I knew somebody who was a coach and in the business world, and he'd have his t-shirt and shorts in the car with his sneakers, and he'd have his suit, and sometimes he'd wear the jacket, sometimes he wouldn't. So you're prepared for any situation.
Exactly.
You just get to the car and pull out. So it doesn't hurt to have these shoes. Like, I'll wear heels only when I present. I just won't wear it any other time. So then I have another pair of shoes when you walk out. And there's nothing wrong with that. I once presented with a pair of flat shoes, and I felt flat.
Yeah.
It just, I just couldn't get to where I wanted to be in flat shoes. That's not true about everybody, but then you just change. Plenty of people, it's become vogue now. I don't do this because I don't work in Manhattan and I walk a lot, but it's been in vogue now. Wear your running shoes or sneakers or whatever you want to call them, and get to the office and put on work shoes. Or some people, I worked with somebody who had like 6 pair of shoes in her office, depending on, I guess, the outfit, what she had to do. And so be prepared. And know your
prepared.
Audience.
Although I would have to say, because that whole running shoe thing to the office started back when I was in the corporate world.
That started a
Long
Yes.
time ago. And I always counsel that, you may run into a client, you may run into somebody you're trying to impress, and you've got these really sloppy running shoes on. There's plenty of good walking shoes, comfortable shoes that look halfway decent. So I always say something in between the office shoe and the
Right. I
and
mean,
the running
it's
shoe.
an image. It's you're
Yes.
setting.
Yeah.
But in some
But all
places,
fun.
I think in Manhattan, it's become.
It's yes,
Different
exactly.
cities have their own culture, and
Well, the more
that
shredded,
becomes-
the better for the jeans. So
Right.
we're in that culture.
right. So, we age ourselves when we have our
Yes,
judgments.
exactly.
Because when you talk to millennials, there are different expectations. So I speak to people who do pitch competitions, and they get up there and they're wearing a t-shirt and jeans. I'm thinking, you're trying to get money from venture capitalists for your company, and that's how you dress? But that's the startup world. You have to know where you are.
Yes, that's why there's no book that you can hand somebody to say, here's how you should dress when. You really have to make the decision. Every company is different. Every situation is different. Every body shape's going to be different. I mean, it's just, you have to be smart about it. And really, I come back again to where we started. What do you want people to think of you? What's the image? Okay, how does that translate? Color, fit, style, all those things you have to take into account. And it's different for every situation.
I would also say it's different in different places, because we have an office in New York and we have an office here.
Yes.
And the level of dress is different.
Yes, Florida.
In
Go down
what
to
way?
Florida.
In what way do you see?
It's not really that it's more professional, but it's more modern professional. So how you look, how you carry yourself, you don't want to be too conservative. Like, too conservative is not great, but you need to look professional. You need to look polished, to use her word. Those, without being conservative or traditional there. Otherwise, you put yourself in just an image that is not in line with the company and the clients.
and you're observant. And so that's exactly what you need to do. Nobody told you that. There's probably no handbook, even if you went to the dress section of the handbook that says, here's what our expectations are. It's probably exactly the same whether it's New York or whether it's here. But by observing the other people, the people that are in the position you would like to be in, you figured out that there's a few nuances there. And the same thing if you would go south. It would be, you may see people wearing shorts with a jacket. It completely differs.
Which I will never do.
Yes, I totally agree with you.
I mean, you even see that on college campuses. I know some colleges down south, and we are down south because I'm originally from New York, but I mean further south, the females, the college students on very conservative universities, wear dresses and pearls. I'm thinking, really, in this day and age?
Right,
But that's the culture there.
right. And then up here,
And you wanna
they
be
wear
part of that.
pajamas.
Right. Yeah. All different things. Let's talk about something else. I remember back in it may have been 70s or 80s, closer to the 80s, when some people were going to schools. I remember my sister telling me this story. She went to a college that was primarily male, and they just became co-ed. And she said the women were so feminist there that if a man held the door open for you, they yelled at him. And she realized this wasn't the school she wanted to go to. Switched over to Penn State, which was much more traditional. But chivalry, that was the 80s. Now we're in 2019. What's with chivalry, holding doors open? Maybe where do you stand when you walk down the street with somebody? There were different reasons for it. But what do you say about chivalry now? Or if that's even the right word?
I think it's still the right word. I think it's gotten a little bit confusing. I mentioned earlier that chivalry was not dead, that when you're introducing, women are still accorded a little bit of extra respect. So we still teach that it is appropriate in many situations for a man to pull the chair out for a woman at the table. In social situations, always. In business situations, it depends. But I also tell the women, if you're dining with somebody who's very important, somebody who's much older, that maybe you want to pull the chair out for that person. I think one of the differences is if a man and a woman are walking towards a door, if the woman gets there first, she's going to hold the door for the man. If the man gets there first, he's going to hold the door for her. If they get there at the same time, the man's going to hold the door for the woman. And I always say to the women, he's not doing it because he thinks you can't do it. It is a little bit of extra respect that's still accorded. So I know it's gotten a little bit confusing now because you do see a little bit of the feminist, why are you doing that for me? Are you trying to send me the message that you don't think I can do it? And that's not the message. It's just an extra kindness, I think. So I think it's a good thing.
I think that equality is correct, but there is, I think there is just a basic truth of equal but different.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I would help somebody get a jacket on if he is trying to get it on and struggling.
Right.
I would hope he wouldn't be offended just as much. I wouldn't be offended if somebody helped me. So I guess if you're just trying to be courteous.
Right. Exactly.
And helpful.
Yes, exactly.
I was walking into just like a Rutter's yesterday and I got my coffee and I came out, and as I was going out, I held the door open for two young men coming in, and they were probably in their like mid to late 20s, and the one guy turned around and he said, "It's me who should be holding the door for you." So I don't know if he did that because I'm older than him or just he had manners.
Yes.
But I thought differently of him after that in a positive way.
Yes, yes, I would agree.
And what about when you hold the door open for somebody and they walk through and don't say a thing to you?
Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, it's snarky if you say thank you, or you don't want to be
Yes.
snarky because then you're
It's,
not being
under your breath.
But what do you do about
Yes.
that? Before we forget about this, because I know the hour, we have 10 more minutes that we're going to be talking about this, let's talk about dining etiquette and why that is important, both socially and especially for business.
Yes. I will say dining is my very favorite thing to teach, and we're not going to talk about it today, but when we teach it, we talk as much about the history of dining because most of our rules go back 500 or more years and we still follow the same rules. The dining rules are really built around making sitting at the table a pleasant experience for everyone. I think we would all agree there's nothing worse than sitting at a table with somebody that is talking with food rolling around in their mouth, or is stealing food off your plate, or taking too much of something so that everybody doesn't get it. So it is important. We do, most of the colleges in the area, we do a dining program. They figured out that the students can be the smartest in the class and they get taken out for an interview meal and completely lose the opportunity because they have no idea how to handle themselves. Or when I was running this training program, part of the interview process was taking people out to lunch. And we would usually have more than one interviewee at a time with us. So if you've got an individual that has not a clue as to how to handle themselves at the table, which utensil to use, etc., it's really hard to focus on selling yourself at that interview meal. So even though table manners were not something necessarily that somebody was being judged on, it became part of what was important for them, one of the skills that was important for them to have in order to be successful. You may go out with a client who knows nothing about dining and could care less if you've got good table manners or not, or you may go out with somebody that says, that person really didn't know how to handle themselves at the table. I wonder what else this person doesn't know. So the little stuff doesn't matter. As I said, if you pick up the wrong fork, somebody's not gonna say, oh, that person shouldn't get the job. But if the manners are truly egregious, it does become an important part of the decision process that can be used against somebody. So it's just one more tool in your arsenal to make sure that you are well prepared to work in the professional world.
I want to thank everybody for coming today, and I want to use proper etiquette, and thank you, Carol.
Thank you. And as long as we're both sitting down, then it's okay.
Right, we're both, we're on equal par, right, okay.